Welcome to the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. I am your host, Heidy De La Cruz, and I am on the mission to change the narrative of immigration, one immigrant story at a time. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. I am your host, Heidy De La Cruz, and today I have a very special guest. I have Prasanta with me today. And Prasanta, thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited to speak to you. One, because we are both in the Redbud Writers Guild together, but then also I'm really excited about your book. So we'll get to the book later, but thank you so much for being here and being willing to share your story of growing up. Well, you were born in India and then growing up here in the United States. So thank you so much for being willing to share that and share about your book. And how are you today?
Well, thank you for having me, Heidi. So great to be here. I'm doing great.
Yes. And so we are recording this in May, but it will be released later on. And your book just released. So I asked you before we started recording, like, how has that book launch been for you?
Oh, it's been super exciting. This is my first book, so I am grateful, all the feels.
Yeah.
It's been a whirlwind and all kinds of good things. And I'm excited and just it's amazing.
Congratulations, first of all. And to me, it's so amazing. I feel like this year I've actually interviewed authors, right? I've interviewed authors, and we know my podcast is about immigration. So to me, it's just so amazing that I've had guests who have published books. One, because they're immigrants, right? And then two, they are publishing a book that's not in their native language. And that's just so incredible to me. And it's just like, anyone who has a dream and has the desire to do anything, like, you really really can do it as long as you put your mind to it and find people that can help you and just do it. So congratulations on the book. I do want to get started though at the very beginning, so let's introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, and then let's talk about growing life in India from what you remember, because I know you came as a child to the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my name is Prasanta, and I was born in India, as you mentioned, and we came to the United States. Actually, I was very young. I was 1 year old. So I was just a baby, actually, essentially, when
Oh,
we came to the US. And so we lived in a few different places, settled in New Jersey and then Louisiana, settled in South Dakota for several years. And then we ended up
wow.
staying yeah, and my parents got tired of the cold, so they ended up then moving to the South, to Alabama, where the
Okay.
weather was nicer, and so we ended up moving to a small town, and that's where I grew up, was in actually a small town in Alabama. And I then, as an adult, I grew up and then I moved away, and now I live in Wisconsin. I live in the Midwest. So
Okay.
that's like a short summary geographically of where we've been and where I've moved.
Yeah.
And I work as a writer and editor and a public health professional. And so that's just a very quick like bio there.
Awesome. Wow. So lots of moving around, which is actually very common for immigrants, I have found. But so do you know what events led your family because to move to the
Yeah.
US since you were so young?
Yeah, for sure I do, because we've talked about this with my parents.
Mhm.
And so my father, he was a physician in India. And actually, he was not really thinking to go to the United States, but I think actually it was his father who planted the idea in his
Oh,
mind. My dad was not planning to leave. He was going to stay. But my grandfather said something to him about maybe you will go to America and then, learn and bring some things back. And so that planted an
oh,
idea in my dad's mind that he was going to go to America. He wanted to come and bring equipment back. He wanted to come work for a while, save some money, and then take equipment back to India because where they were working, they didn't have all of the diagnostic equipment and such.
yeah.
So the plan was not to stay. The plan was actually to come back to India. And so that kind of planted the seed. And then after 1965, when the United States, they passed the Immigration and Nationality Act, which opened up the door for immigrants to come. So that is what opened up the door to for my dad to come. And after that act, I mean, a few years after that, that's what allowed him to actually pursue this idea of coming to the United States. And, you know, like I said, essentially
Yeah.
eventually go back to India and take back what he was learning and some new equipment and technology and serve the people there in India.
So he comes and he eventually stayed. Do you know what led him to stay instead of having to go back like the original plan was?
Well, I think after a while, I was 1 year old and my sister was born 30 days
Mhm.
later when we
Oh,
came, and my mother. Yeah. So,
yeah. Wow.
normally they wouldn't allow someone that late stage in pregnancy, but because my dad was a doctor, I think they allowed
Yeah.
it. So here she was not speaking English, even though she had learned English in India, she had learned it in school, but she hadn't
Mhm.
really spoke it fluently
Yeah.
in a culture around. So it's different, right? The
Mhm.
book learning and then actually being immersed into it.
Yes.
So she had learned English. She had two babies. And so she would sit in the apartment and she learned English by watching I Love Lucy on TV. So
Oh.
that's really, yeah, that's so true. So I think eventually then my brother was born here. So I think they got settled into life here. And eventually after
Yeah.
moving to the South, and that was when they were able to buy their first home after we moved there. So we bought a house and then we started growing up. The kids started growing
Yeah.
up. And so I think people, we started to get assimilated.
Yeah.
And so eventually, I know we actually did talk about, I remember I was 12 years old. We had this discussion. Should we move back to India or should we stay here? Well, by that age, I was just ready to stay because that was all I had ever known.
Yeah.
And so we ended up staying.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, yeah, it is a tough decision, especially with, a whole family, three kids. It's not like you can just up and leave. It's a whole disruption. But that's actually like some families do that when they immigrate to the United States. Like their kids are, 12 or teenagers. And it's just like, they make that tough decision of trying to find a better condition of living, a better standard of living, and then they come to the United States. But so tell us about growing up in Alabama, because I know in your book you had mentioned you guys were the only Indian family, right, in your small town. So tell us about that.
Yeah, for sure. So we were the first Indian immigrant family within
Yeah.
a 30, 45-minute radius. So we were the first Indian immigrants people had seen in that area and came, in this small town in Alabama. Other Indian immigrants who had come, which was again not too many in those that at that stage, they still hadn't come yet. Many were going to be coming in future years, but they weren't flocking to a small town in Alabama. I mean, they were all going to big cities like California and like New York City and
Yeah.
Chicago and San Francisco area. So people or Houston, nobody was going to Alabama. So we were
Mhm.
kind of the anomaly. So the fact that, my parents even chose this little town that was far away from any other Indians is pretty amazing. And so it was interesting growing up. We have our stories, I share some in the book. I
Mhm.
share about, the good and the bad. There were some hard things, but there were also
Mhm.
people that were very welcoming and wanted us there because they desperately needed a doctor. And that's why we went. And my
Okay.
parents fell in love with the environment. It was a beautiful little town
Yeah.
surrounded with hills and so pretty and green.
Mhm.
So they loved the place. They fell in love with that area. And so we
Yeah.
we ended up staying.
Yeah, and even the opening story that you like the story that you opened the book with, I was just like, "Oh, whoa, okay, right off the bat." So, thank you so much for sharing that. Like, it's your truth, right? So, thank you so
Yeah.
much for sharing that. And
Yeah.
so, okay, so in that town needing a physician is what brought your parents down to that small to that area in Alabama.
Right. That's
Right.
correct.
Okay. All right. I want to talk about now visiting India for the first time.
Yeah.
Like how was that?
Yeah, so the first visit that I can recall, I was about 7 or 8 years old, and we had just moved to Alabama and we went back to India to visit. We had no relatives in the United States. All my
Mhm.
aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, they're all in India at that time. Now there was one other family that did move, that was my mother's aunt. So I had like second cousins that came, but everyone else was in India, all of their immediate family, which were
Wow.
big families, giant families.
Yes.
They each my parents have like each my dad has four siblings. My mom has five siblings, so really big families that they had left behind
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
So we went back, and so my earliest memories of going to India. I remember my grandfather had a farm. So we would go to the farm, and that was a special visit to get to see the farm and see, the horses, the workers would, move around on horses to see the crops that they were growing. I got to like just yank sugar cane right out of the ground and eat it. It was
Yeah.
amazing. And I
Oh,
remember that they actually would use that sugar cane, they would ground it into brown sugar. And so I got to see they had an ox. So this was like old fashioned, we're talking India and, small village. So they didn't have the machinery. Everything was done,
yeah.
by animal and the animal power. So this oxen would just go in a big circle, and it would grind the sugar cane into this really sweet sugar. And then I had Hindi lessons, and I just remember all the newness. Like it was so different
Yeah.
from anything I had ever seen. People, of course, everybody was speaking a different language that I didn't understand. But the way people dressed, and the customs, and the way people interacted with one another was all very different. There was
Yeah.
all kinds of new things to learn. And I just remember being overwhelmed with all the newness. And I remember
Yeah.
comparing that to my life in the States and thinking, wow, I was just overwhelmed with how different life was, and that there was a place on the other side of the world that was like this. And
Yeah.
none of my friends in Alabama, the little kids in school that I was in school with, knew that there was this other place like this. And it
Yeah.
was just I just remember feeling like this is such an amazing feeling, and this thing I'm going through. And there was nobody to tell, like, wow, like, there was all this newness over there. So, I mean, the streets were filled with cars, but also animals walking, they're all sharing the same street. You've got cows on the same street sharing that with donkey carts and cars and bicycles and trucks, and they're all together. So
Yeah.
it's completely a different society, different culture. So
Yeah.
it
Oh
was
my
like a culture
goodness.
shock as a child, but it
Oh
was,
yeah.
yeah, a unique, visit.
Hi, Heidi here. Thank you so much for listening and supporting my podcast, but most importantly, the mission. If you would like to further support this podcast, there are a few ways you can do that. You can sign up for the newsletter. You'll receive the episodes straight to your inbox every time they drop. The link is in the show notes and the show description. You can subscribe to the podcast YouTube channel. And lastly, you can donate money. That link is also in the show notes and show description. If you would like to sponsor an episode or promote your business on this show, send me an email at Heidi@HeidiDeLaCruz.com. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the episode. Yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, it sounds like it was an amazing experience for you as a child to be able to see that newness and to
Yeah.
be able to see like where your parents were from
Yeah.
and things like that. So visiting India, what did you notice? Like what cultural norms did you notice that your parents kept living in the United States, and what cultural norms did you notice that they actually adapted, like American culture?
Yeah. So they had actually, because back then you were really assimilating. And where
Mm-hmm.
we lived in an area with no other Indian people, there was no opportunity to practice some of the traditions and some of the
Mm,
holidays that they grew up with. We were on our own. There was
yeah.
nobody to do anything with. So they kind of put all that behind them, right? And they can really assimilate into American culture. So essentially they left a little bit of themselves behind, right? And so one of the things that they really adapted to was clothing. My mother eventually, she was wearing American clothes and in America, but when we were in India, we'd wear, Indian clothes.
Yeah.
So those were some of the things that we would do that were different. Yeah, there were a lot of holidays and traditions I think I didn't grow up with and didn't learn
Mm.
because we just didn't have that opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. And being the only ones there. I see that. And
Yeah.
so how did you end up in the Midwest then?
Well, I actually, so we got jobs here after I got married, and, and as an
Oh,
adult,
okay.
and we ended up, I moved to the Midwest. I mean, my parents stayed in the South, but I ended up moving up here.
And is your guys' family still in India, or did anybody after migrate too?
Oh, I actually do have one cousin that actually migrated. Also, she's my first cousin, my mom's sister's daughter. So yeah,
Oh,
she
okay.
ended
Well,
up
that's
coming. But
nice.
otherwise, everybody's still in India.
Still in India. How often do you get to
Huge family.
visit?
I was there 2 years ago. I got
Nice.
to go to North India, where my family is from, and got to see relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins that I hadn't seen in a number of years. So that was really special.
Oh, it sounds special. I'm so glad you were able to visit. And so now let's talk about your book, Beyond Ethnic Loneliness.
Yeah.
And I found that title to be so unique, and I learned so much from reading from your book. So, when did you know that you wanted to write a book, and how did you know it was going to be this particular topic?
Yeah, sure. So, well, I've been writing for many years. I've been a writer a good number of years. Before I was writing publicly, I started writing publicly over 15 years ago. And before then, I was just writing for myself mostly. But about 15 years ago, I started putting my work out there, and I started then eventually submitting articles here and there. And I had a dream that eventually I might write a book, but I hadn't really thought, for sure what it might be.
Yeah.
A few years later, after this is kind of condensing the story, but at one point in my life, I did identify myself as being a writer, even
Yeah.
though I had been writing mostly for myself. But that was part of my identity
Yeah.
and something about me. So I started just submitting, getting my work out there. I joined the Red Bud Writers Guild. I mean, I started immersing myself in this world of writing and publishing, thinking someday I would write a book. I didn't at that time know that this would be the title or this would be the content, even though I was looking at issues of identity. Eventually, though, so I would say about eight years ago, then I really started looking at more of issues of identity and ethnicity, and considering what was happening in my own journey of ethnic identity and identity formation. And that's what led me to this book, was my own personal journey.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's eventually what got me to this point and this
Yeah.
title in this book.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Again, I learned so much, and I was like, I guess the way that you put it, it's like, okay, I've experienced it, but I guess I couldn't put it into like words as to like, okay, this is actually what it is. It's just like, me growing up as a child of immigrants, and I've talked about this on the podcast multiple times. It's just like that whole like I'm too Dominican for my American friends, and then too American for my family. So it's like where do I fit in kind of thing.
Mhm.
Until one year, I'm just like, you know what? I am Dominican. Like that's just
Yeah.
who I am. That is my identity. No one can tell me anything different, and just owning that. Um, so what is one thing that you would like readers to get from your book?
Hmm. Yeah, so I actually thank you for sharing that. One of my goals was to provide language for readers like you.
Yes.
Like I wanted to put into words and name this experience that we're going through, and so that we can, in order to like heal and move, we also have to like name it. We have to be aware of
Yes.
it and then name it. So that was part of my goal. So thank you for saying that. I really want, one of the goals I have is that people will identify, name it, and reclaim their identity. Reclaim, like you said, I'm Dominican. Went through some of that process, and you decided that this is what I'm going to be. This is
Yeah.
who I am. So,
Mhm.
so figuring that out and learning and reclaiming our ethnic identity. We're both and. We're not like either or. We
Yes.
have a multicultural, a bicultural backgrounds. We come from, these rich cultural heritage that we bring with us, and how can we just leave that behind, right?
Yeah.
So I really would love readers to first of all name and understand that experience for people like us who are immigrants and people of color, but also, for white majority readers to understand what our neighbors and friends are going through, what their
Yeah.
immigrant friends and neighbors are experiencing, to give them a greater awareness and empathy and understanding of this is the experience of what other people are going through. So, and I really hope too that readers find hope in these pages. Like there is, how do you find a sense of belonging if you are feeling like you're not sure where you fit in or how you belong? I really hope that readers will be able to find a path to belonging through these
Oh,
pages.
beautiful, beautiful. Oh my goodness. That is so true. Like when I started this podcast, it was with that in mind, exactly what you said, non-immigrants, so they can hear the stories of immigrants, children of immigrants, and they can see how our experience is just so different from theirs, and then just have that compassion, just have that empathy, and also just to provide that safe space for us to share our stories.
Yes.
uh Yes, a lot of times my guest tells me, like, they'll go on podcasts and things like and share their story, but it's the first time that they're sharing the immigration part of their
Mm,
story, the immigration journey of their stories. And I'm just like so thankful that God has provided this space for
mm,
this. And I've learned so much from so many different stories from and of different cultures too. Like I've just in the history as well, like you just mentioned about the immigration law that was passed that allowed your father to actually be able to come to the United States, and
mm,
his service was needed. They needed a doctor where you guys
mhm,
ended up, like that need was there. So it
mm.
just also makes me feel like, God provided that pathway for you guys to go, for him to go and provide that service, that skills that God provided for him, you know?
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely. Yeah,
yes, it's
it's
so great.
amazing story, how it all came together.
Yeah, it is. And then here you are now. I just got chills, but here you are now just sharing, your parents, a little bit of your parents' story, because I know that they have their own story to tell and share, but a little bit of their stories and then your experience, and then also just providing, like you said, that identity, that name to what we felt and what we feel, and those who are feeling it the same way. So thank you for writing the book, and I definitely felt seen in the book.
Mm,
Although again, you're
thank you.
Indian, I'm Dominican, but it's still
Yeah.
like that tug and that identity of like, where do I fit in? And so many people I know will relate to that, because I've had people share on this podcast about
Mhm.
that. So,
Mhm.
for this book, I'm sure you had to do a lot of research because you shared a lot of facts and a lot of things. So,
Mhm.
what is one thing that stood out during your research process for this book?
Yeah, you're right. I had to read a lot. So I read, honestly, there was more than I realized. I think so. One of the surprising things was when I was talking about this book project with the publisher, and they wanted Beyond Ethnic Loneliness to be representative of multiple ethnicities.
Yeah.
So and that's something I had to learn and research. Even though I am an Indian American immigrant, and I am a woman of color, and I am, I walk in these spaces, but I don't know all the stories and what it feels like for you, Heidi, as a
Yeah.
Dominican immigrant. I don't know exactly what that is for you. And so many the same is true for other ethnicities and racial. I
Yes.
I had to learn. So, but I had already been reading and learning for several years anyway, because I was on that path of learning and exploring this issue. But in terms of writing the book, I really had to double down on my reading, and I read maybe 40 books. I read a lot of nonfiction. I read a lot of memoir. Memoir was amazing,
Mm,
just to hear firsthand the stories of people, and their stories coming to the United States and their experiences and what it was like for them, and a wide variety of perspectives. So it was so enriching. I just
yeah.
you can't read that so many stories of people and not come away changed
Yeah.
and impacted in some way, right? The stories that you
Yes.
tell on the show here, and we're changed by stories. So I
Yeah.
think it was just personally enriching for me, and very enjoyable. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was.
Yeah, you definitely do provide a lot of resources in there. And I was like adding books to my list, like, oh, I want to read that one and that one and that one. So yes, wow. So over 40 books. That is amazing just to write this one. And so I like asking my guests, what does the American dream mean to you? Because I feel like it's so different for everybody, but then like I feel like I've been getting this a common answer. So
Mm.
what does the American dream mean to you?
Yeah, I love that question. So for me, that dream means to me that I will find that I belong here, that I
Oh,
will belong wherever I find myself here, that my American dream is belonging. Like, this is my home and I belong here. And I don't have to, prove it. I exist here and I belong here.
Oh my goodness, that is powerful. Yes. Oh my goodness. Thank you for that. And one, where can people connect with you? And two, where can they purchase your book?
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Heidi. Well, people can connect with me at my website, prasantaverma.com. I have a newsletter. I'd love for you to follow along. You can join from my website. And I'm on Instagram at prasantaverma. You can find me there. I'd love to be in conversation with you. And the book is available everywhere books are sold. It's your favorite retailer.
Perfect. So I will add your links to the show description and the show notes. And I wrote a book review on your book because again, it was amazing. So I will link that as well. And I will include the links for people can purchase your book. Any last words that you would like to leave with the audience?
Well, I guess I will just say, I hope that, members of your audience and your podcast, um, find a sense of belonging, that my desire is that we would all be more connected, a little less lonely, that we would, have more conversations like this about belonging, and that all of us, our stories, matter, and that they are seen and heard and they belong.
Amen. I love that. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.